So in the last episode, I told you my story, but in this one, I'm going to give you reasons why you shouldn't start a startup. There's a lot of glamour and the obvious upside of success, but startups can also be extremely hard. In my opinion, startups are one of the hardest things to pull off successfully. Scaling a successful startup takes a long time. I'd say anywhere between 4 to 10 years. In this episode, I'm going to go through two reasons, and there are a multitude of reasons, but I'm going to focus specifically on two reasons why you shouldn't start a startup. The first reason is emotional risk. Startups are very, very hard to deal with, and we'll come to that in a bit. And the second reason is financial risk. It is so easy to go bankrupt with a couple of bad moves, especially in the early days of your startup. Before I start talking about emotional risk, I want to tell you a little bit about my friends. I've had roughly the same set of friends for the last 10 years, right? It's been a decade where I've just enjoyed and had fun with the same set of people. In this decade of being friends with these people, I've never paid them and I've never expected anything in return from them, apart from maybe just being there when times are rough. A lot of people think you can just take your friends, tell them, hey, I want to start up with you, and everything's going to be fine the very next day. In reality, things are much, much harder. If you start working with your friends, and I started my career there and I've seen the issues, right? There will come a point in time where you might need to fire them, right? And that is the worst conversation to have with somebody you've known for a decade, right? And I've had this conversation. Somebody I knew for a decade who I had to let go in one of my previous companies, and it's not a fun place to be in. A lot of people think startups are, I have a great idea. I'm just going to build something along the lines of that idea, and I'll start selling it, and then I'll be successful overnight. But that's the easy part. The hard part is actually managing a lot of this risk that comes in the way. As CEO or a co-founder, your job is to absorb all the risk of a startup. The risk with the product, the risk with the customers, the risk of your employees, the risk of just the finances in the bank. It's your job to handle all of that. And it can get extremely overwhelming at times. Even after doing this for almost a decade, it can get really overwhelming. In my first startup, I had an employee who was a longtime friend of mine who I've had some great memories with, who I had to let go of. And the reason was this: that person simply wasn't pulling his weight, right? Which means that person wasn't doing the job that he was assigned. I'd known this person for a very long time, and I just couldn't gather the resilience to let go of him. The only problem was I also had other employees at the same time, and they were watching this behavior and they were getting demoralized in the process. They were saying, hey, this person is not doing anything for the company. You're still letting him on. You're still paying him a salary. Why should I work? Why should I put in all this hard work? So over the next few months, I realized it was unfair for all the other employees that I had to keep this person on. And in my last company, JobsPire, we had this one girl who was on the sales side who was also studying for her master's. And I knew that she was saving up money, the money she'd made at JobsPire, to go and pay for her master's. She was saving that money up, right? And she was also studying for the course side by side. At one point, her team leader comes to me and says, Varun, this person's not performing well. I think we'll have to let go of her. And I thought about it a lot. If I fired this girl, she would not have enough money to do her master's right after. If I didn't fire her, her team leader, as well as everybody else in the company, would see it as a sign of weakness, as a sign of, hey, I can do whatever I want in this company and I'm still going to get paid. So I had a dilemma. I just didn't want the emotional setback of having to fire somebody who was saving up money to go do her future course and just tell her, I'm going to ruin this dream of yours, right? I didn't want to do that. A couple of months passed and the problem was getting worse. The girl was performing very poorly on her sales targets and there wasn't much I could do. 2 months later, I ended up firing her. She took it extremely badly. She was almost in tears by the end of it. And I told her that, look, I had an option. Either I let you continue doing this and miss your numbers again and again despite warnings, or I let you go, right? And I chose to be the person that cares about the company more than I care about your personal needs, right? And I've never actually said something like this, but for the first time in my life, I realized the value of placing the company before any particular person in the company, even if that person is me. I picked up the call, I dialed one of my lead investors, and he's also one of my mentors. So I was telling him that this happened, and I spent 2 months on it. I was thinking about it the entire 2 months, and he said, "Oh, you should have fired her 2 months ago." And I said, "Why would you say that? I mean, everybody deserves a second chance. Why not? I thought she'll do better over the next 2 months." And he said, "Look, at the end of the day, you still ended up firing her. all you did was waste 2 months of your time, and you spent 2 months worrying about this particular problem. So the next time, just make that decision faster. And I sort of started realizing that anybody who didn't deliver consistent value to the company, I would eventually end up firing them, right? And not just in my company, in every other company in the world, if you stop providing enough value over time, then you will be removed from that company. And the only problem was, because I was working with people with real emotions, with real feelings. I mean, till now it was just a joke, right? Till I wanted to start a startup, it was all in the air, right? It was like, oh, I want to manage people. But managing people comes with handling things like a person breaking down in front of you, a person saying, hey, I'm not going to be able to afford my school fees for my kids, right? So I've been in those situations. I've seen how difficult it is, but you still have to make the decision that favors the company the most. It's not just your job as CEO, it's also your fiduciary and legal duty to all your stakeholders. So I had a terrible time trying to separate the emotional component of a business and the kind of people involved, their needs, their satisfaction, their value drivers, and at the same time, the cost of that person and the technical value that person was driving in. I had a very hard time separating these two. When I started a company, I started with the belief that you start a team and your team is like a family. But I realized that is the worst way to look at a startup, right? In a real family, nobody gets paid, nobody gets fired, and nobody definitely gets demoted, right? It's a very different environment. And I think the best way to look at it would be as Reed Hastings from Netflix says, as a sports team. You say, I've got a limited number of slots in this company, and you're only as good as your last season or your last game even. And that's exactly how we approach things at Avalon. Everybody's got to be on their toes all the time, because they know that if they don't provide enough value, then we might not be able to justify paying them that much. And you might think that creates a very scary culture where people are always worried about being fired, but that's not true at all. What I've seen is that it encourages an even better culture, because it keeps all the slackers out. So everybody is extremely motivated to perform at their best. Not just because, hey, there's this fear of being fired, but also because everybody else around them is performing at their best. And eventually people just forget about the fact that they can get fired, right? I used to think that when you start a company, you'll have these employees and they'll stay with you for like years and years. But in reality, people don't stay with you for that long, right? Everybody has their own needs. Everybody wants to start a company of their own, or retire to an island, or travel, or whatever, right? And you're nobody to shackle them back, right? Today, in 2018, an employee will maximum stay with you anywhere between a day to like 4 or 5 years at maximum, right? The average is about a year. And you've got to make the best of that person in that year. So treating somebody like a family member, knowing fully well that this person is not going to be in the family a year later, not because of your fault, but because of that person's needs and that person's own career path for themselves, you will start approaching things a little differently. You say, I have a limited amount of control over this person's time and energy, over this 1 year or 2 years or 3 years that this person is going to be here for. How do I make best use of it to make my company, which is as good as your baby, a success, right? So I've had some extremely grueling emotional situations, and I've realized that the minute I walk in the 4 walls of Avalon, I leave my emotions behind. I still use it, obviously everybody deserves a fair trial, but even when we hire people, when we shake hands with them and say you're hired, we also tell them that, look, the day you stop providing value to a company like Avalon, we will not be afraid to show you the door, right? And that creates an amazing culture. It creates a competitive culture, but at the same time, it creates a culture where nobody is slacking. As CEO or a co-founder, you have to absorb all of this risk, right? Because tomorrow if the product fails, if you run out of money, if your investors aren't happy with you, if your employees aren't happy with you, it is your fault. You absorb that risk first. Nobody else is going to sit and say, oh yeah, that's my problem, because that rarely happens. And that brings me to my second big problem with startups, or the second hardest part of running a startup, which is the financial risk. I know personally of people who've started a startup, put everything on the line, even raised capital, and then, after a few years, run out of money, especially on the wire, just when they were about to be successful, have to lay so many people off, and then go back to being almost homeless, right? I've seen that happen in front of my eyes, and I still, despite all of that, do this on a daily basis, knowing fully well that that is a particular end result or an end outcome of running a startup. You can become homeless. It's not a pipe dream. You can actually lose all your money and go back to living with your parents. More important than that, you'll find that you're one of the only people in your company that actually gives a shit about the capital, right? That actually cares about how that money is being spent. I'll bring you back to one of my experiences where we were running a project, we were running an advertising campaign for one of our clients, and I had this employee of mine, this person who was handling the marketing campaign, spent over 12 lakhs trying to do something new, right? And I wasn't aware of this decision. I just okayed it without going through things because I had 100 other things to manage. And as luck would have it, out of the 12 lakhs that we spent, we got less than 500 signups, which is, in all regards, an absolute failure. And when I went, I confronted this employee and I said, I gave you responsibility to do this project, you screwed up. The dude put his hands up, said, I'm sorry, I'm leaving Avalon. I tried my best, couldn't do anything, and he walked out of the door. And I said, what about my 12 lakhs? And he just walked out of the door. I mean, everybody wants to take responsibility, right? I've seen a lot of my employees come up and say, I want to take responsibility of this or responsibility of that. And by responsibility, they just mean they don't want to be ordered around, right? They just want to make their own decisions. But those decisions come with real downsides, which is you can lose a lot of money. And unless you run a company of your own and you're responsible for the bank of that company, you will not know what it's like. In this case, that 12 lakhs, that damage was on me, right? Because at the end of the day, as CEO, I okayed that decision at the final level. And it was my bad because I was working on so many different things that one particular problem I had to overlook. So in the one instance that I actually delegated a financially risky task to somebody else, I was let down. Right? And I've been let down multiple times in my life, especially when it comes to financial decisions. So we have a threshold, right? In Avalon, we say that if you're burning, if one of your projects is going to cost you more than $1 lakh, then you need approval from either me or my co-founder Shashank. So as much as everyone wants to take control, every employee says, I'm empowered, I feel like I'm making decisions. Unless the financial risk is on you, no, you're only taking a partial decision. Very recently, I was with one of the guys working in a multinational company who had a budget of 45 lakhs. Who managed a team of 4 or 5 people, and he was talking about how he feels like a CEO. And I said, no, that capital at 45 lakhs is not yours. If it was yours, then you'd have every right to call yourself CEO of that project, right? Because at the end of the day, if it's from your pocket or if something that you worked extremely hard to make, then you will not realize the value of it. And as a startup CEO, in this case, you are fully responsible for it. And especially in my early days, I did not know what to do with capital. I didn't know if something was expensive or not. Should I spend $1.5 lakh on office chairs? Should I spend $1 lakh on ceiling lights? Should I, not spend on ceiling lights and spend on employees instead? There are so many variables involved in a startup, and unfortunately, a lot of those variables cost money, right? And you are at the end of the day responsible for that money without a guiding post. There's no book or template that will tell you, oh yeah, you should spend on furniture, you should spend on this person even though he's a little more expensive. So those decisions are decisions that you will encounter on a day-to-day basis. Every day is crisis day in a startup. So a multitude of other reasons, I'm not going to cover them. These are simple ones like, what if your startup fails? What if your idea is not good enough? What if there are competitors? I mean, we'll cover all of those. Those are solvable, right? You can always change your startup. But think like having a co-founder and having a fight with that co-founder, or having employees and realizing that these people are not good enough and having to fire people point blank. And I've done that so much, right? Every single person that I fired point blank has taken it personally. Despite the fact that when I hire people, I tell them, don't take this personally. If you do not add enough value to the company, we'll have to let you go. And we've had people work with us for years who've continuously delivered value, who we cherish. We even have celebrations in their name every few years, and we have employees like that. We also have employees who we fired point blank after 24 hours, right? It just depends on the amount of value and the kind of culture you bring to the team, right? Obviously, you can't create an extremely toxic culture. You can't have a culture where everybody's scared all the time, but you've also got to make sure it's a culture where everybody knows that they have to deliver value. Otherwise, it's the door for them. If you feel like you've got the balls to actually go out there and take this startup risk, go out there and play one of the riskiest games in the world, go out there and probably make a fool of yourself, then startups are for you. If you've gone to this much of the video without leaving, then it means that you're determined to continue building a startup. And this course, now that we've gone through the devil's advocate part of this course, is all about how do you use your finances effectively, how do you manage your emotions, and how you can actually survive in this startup game.